Dear all, State Secretary, distinguished panelists and listeners in the room and online, welcome to this session, Hydrogen Valleys, the Nordic Rally to the Valley, hosted by us at Nordic Energy Research in the Nordic Pavilion here at COP28. My name is Kevin Johnsen, I'm the COO at Nordic Energy Research, and I will be your moderator today. Nordic Energy Research is an institution for joint energy research and policy cooperation under the Nordic Council of Ministers. The aims of our works include increasing cooperation on sustainable forms of energy, stimulating the development of new and competitive energy solutions, and supporting the Nordic region's green transition to carbon neutrality. On your chairs, you can find a postcard with information about how you can connect with us and stay updated on our work. When the Nordic ministers met in Reykjavik in October this year, they stated that it's impossible to electrify all energy consumption. It is important to work on hydrogen, ammonia, and electrofuels, new technologies that will facilitate the green transition in different sectors difficult to electrify. Our contribution from Nordic Energy Research is that we this year have funded 5 projects through our Hydrogen Valleys as Energy Hubs program, together with the other Nordic research financiers. A program that we hope will show the potential of hydrogen to become a zero-emission energy carrier in the Nordic countries by demonstrating solutions that service the entire hydrogen value chain. Today, we want to highlight some of the important work that is being done in the Nordic countries, but also to get a perspective on the concept of hydrogen valleys from our neighbors in the West. So together with Westlén, Dolf Gielen, Ada Jakobsen, Catherine Raw, and Rikke Olufsen, we will dive into the world of hydrogen valleys, exploring the production and transportation of hydrogen, e-fuels, and new energy hubs in the Nordic countries and abroad. First out is Dr. Daniel Westlén. Please give him a warm applause. So, Daniel is the State Secretary to the Swedish Minister for Climate and Environment. You studied at KTH Royal Institute of Technology, where you earned a doctoral of philosophy and science, and later you have worked at Vattenfall, at the Swedish Nuclear Fuel and Waste Management Company, and also at the Liberal Party's Secretariat. You have been the council member at the Swedish Association of Graduate Engineers and the director at the Swedish Center for Nuclear Technology. The floor is yours, Daniel.
Thank you. Which mic do I use?
This one.
Yeah, so they put a reactor physicist in a state secretary in the environmental ministry, and then they closed down the environmental ministry by merging it by the Ministry of Enterprise. I guess you can imagine what kind of reactions this gave in some parts of the Swedish political debate. Now, I think that this was rather logical, because energy is at the core of the climate change and the mitigation work, importantly. We have to do lots of other things, but if we don't fix energy, we can't make it. So, putting someone who worked with energy in the center of this in the government makes sense. Today we talk about hydrogen. We see in Sweden a massive demand for hydrogen. We see a massive demand for clean hydrogen. I mean, the point of, I would call it electrification, but I call hydrogen indirect electrification, because most of this hydrogen that we see that we need will have to come from electrolysis. We have a growing demand from the steel industry. LKAB what's it called? Reducing the iron the iron oxide to iron will consume hydrogen worth 50% of the current Swedish electricity production. So that's roughly 70 terawatt hours of hydrogen, which of course is massive. But that's not all. We also need to produce fossil-free fertilizer, a massive consumer of hydrogen, as well as electrofuels for the parts of the transport sector that we cannot electrify. So for sure there is a massive need of hydrogen. On top of this, the European Union is already using 10 million tons of hydrogen per year in different parts of industry. 10 million tons of hydrogen produced by electrolysis means 500 to 550 terawatt hours of electricity. That's 3 times the Swedish electricity production, and it corresponds to more than the French nuclear fleet's production. So we have a massive task ahead of us just to decarbonize all of this hydrogen that we're already using, because we do have to stop steam methane reforming so that our hydrogen venue does not just increase the consumption of fossil gas. Oh, thank you for that. Why do we talk so much about electrification, and why do I call hydrogen and the electrofuels indirect electrification? Well, obviously it's because the 3 sources of energy that we can expand on a massive scale, so massive that we can actually replace fossil fuels on a global scale while fighting poverty and increasing access to energy for people around the globe, are 3. And that would be solar, it would be wind, and it would be nuclear. Those are the 3 ones that we can expand on a sufficient scale. All of them produce electricity, which means using the electricity directly makes sense. Where we cannot do that, we need to produce fuels of some kind. Hydrogen is in the center of those, which puts hydrogen in the center of this. I will take this chance to briefly say a few words about the Swedish presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers the next year, 2024. We, the Nordic countries, aim to be safer, greener and freer countries. We are on our way to becoming the most sustainable and integrated region in the world, and obviously these are the priorities for the Swedish presidency for next year. Standing together in the Nordic countries makes us stronger, and actually we're kind of important in the on the global scene when we are working together. On top of that, the Nordic countries are at the forefront of innovation-driven climate mitigation work. Our green tech companies export their technologies to the rest of the world and have a really big impact as exporters of green technology. Also, our export of products and services produced with very low carbon energies have a significant impact on consumer emissions all around the world already. So there is great potential in the Nordic countries and in further improving both exports of products and of green tech. I should have said something about the green shipping corridors and how they drive demand for hydrogen as well. But I will keep it short, and I look forward to listening to the panel. I will make some notes, and then I will see what kind of comments I have in the end. So I will leave it to you. Thank you.
Next, for setting some perspective to this, I also just lost my microphone here. So let's see if I can fit it. So, and I think I fixed it. Yes, so thank you. So thank you for setting some perspectives on the challenge that we have. Next up is Dolf Gielen. Let's welcome him to the stage. You have a background from IRENA, where you were the Director for Innovation and Technology, and before that you have worked at both the IEA and the United Nations. You have a PhD from Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, and since 2022, which is quite recently, you have been the World Bank Hydrogen Lead for the Energy Management Assistance Program, and you will introduce us to some of the work done by the World Bank on scaling up clean hydrogen. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin, and many thanks to Nordic Energy Research for having me here. I wanted to say a few words about a publication which we have issued ahead of COP, Scaling Hydrogen Financing for Development, and put that a little bit into context. It's something we did together with the OECD and Hydrogen Council and the Global Infrastructure Facility in support of the Breakthrough Agenda. And so we are ramping up our hydrogen work. We see a very important role for exchange of international best practice. And so Scandinavian best practice, of course, is very important in that context. We have a Hydrogen for Development Partnership that has now nearly 40 partners, but that includes RISE, the Research Institutes of Sweden, and that includes also the Center for Hydrogen Energy Systems, CHES from Sweden. So, and of course, we're happy to consider also Norwegian, Danish, and Finnish participants going forward. And what we do is exchange on best practices. For example, we're currently organizing a study tour for Indian government to the Swedish cluster to learn from that best practice there. So if you look at the Scandinavian best practice, it's of course there is a very impressive and long-standing commitment on the government side for decarbonization. But also I think the close cooperation between the public and private sector is quite unique. The region is unique because it has such a high share of renewable power, which makes it easier to shift to also renewable or green hydrogen. And the approach with hubs or clusters such as Norrbotten is also interesting. I understand there's at the moment a little bit of discussions ongoing on iron ore supply, but I'm sure that will be resolved soon. But it's beyond the individual clusters. I mean, the cooperation across across the region in an international context, I think, is very important and quite unique. And if I look at the questions we're getting now from Latin America, for example, I mean, they would very much like to have something similar, but there's still a long way to go to get there. Now, in a developing country context, what we see is that there is plenty of good ideas to do projects and intent. The problem is if it gets to front-end engineering and design, there's virtually no projects. So everything is stuck in the early stages. And the question is, how do you de-bottleneck that pipeline and get it to a final investment decision? And I think also from that perspective, from how do you design the projects, how do you make the contracts work, I think there's a lot to be learned from Scandinavian countries. We've done quite some risk analysis. Our conclusion is that apart from offtake, everybody's talking about, there's also a number of other risks to look at, such as political risk, the enabling infrastructure, the issue of fiscal aspects of it, technology aspects, permitting risk, and the macroeconomic context. And again, I think there's a lot of best practices from Scandinavia, from the Nordic countries to learn from. So what can you do if you want to get to a business case? You can make the conventional hydrogen more expensive. You can innovate, try to reduce the unit cost for the green hydrogen or clean hydrogen, and you can try to reduce the cost of financing. And in order to reduce the cost of financing, you need to look at general project risks, but there's also a number of hydrogen-specific risks to look at. So that's where we're currently focusing. And we're putting together a 10 gigawatt initiative with the idea of getting 10 gigawatts of green hydrogen projects to final investment decision in developing countries in the next 3 years. And we do that from different angles. So from government support through IBRD. but also private sector support and also risk mitigation instruments through the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. So that's where we are, and we're ramping up our engagement in hydrogen, and we're very happy to engage more closely also with the Nordic countries on this. Thank you.
So I was just taking part in a panel on carbon capture and storage, and I think that what we see here is that some of the same issues that we see in the carbon capture and storage sector is also present in the hydrogen value chain, where there is a lot of projects, but the financial investment decisions are lagging behind. So today we will invite up 3 speakers or panelists that are doing something to close that gap. So our first panelist and speaker is Ada Jakobsen. Please come to the stage. Ada is the CEO of Maritime CleanTech. I think you can take a chair if you'd like as well, or you can use this one. Maritime CleanTech is an innovation network with over 150 partners covering every stage of the value chain for the green transition of the ocean industries. And today you will tell us a bit about how you realize breakthrough technologies for using hydrogen-based fuels, including some of the world's first hydrogen-driven ships. So take it away.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, State Secretary, for mentioning the green corridors, and that's my starting point for this talk. So Maritime CleanTech is a private-public collaboration tool, and we have been doing so in the last 10 years. And through that collaboration, we have actually achieved some breakthrough tech using hydrogen fuel. And 2023 marks a very important year and milestone because there is now demonstrated hydrogen on a barge in Europe, and also from March 2023, a ferry, Hydra, is now operating on liquid hydrogen. So from pilots and from planning and PowerPoints, this is now real. It is happening in the Nordics, and the next normal question would then be, how can we develop and scale this? And one thing is obviously to think about export potential, but the most important and the big theme here at COP is how do we accelerate? And what we see is that you can demonstrate this technology, it works, it is safe, it is used with people. So 300 people can be on this ferry, 80 cars, and it runs for 2 weeks at a time with the liquid hydrogen. So we see that the secret sauce in realizing the project, it's obviously you need to know the technology, but there must be close collaboration with all parts. And for ferries, that means the municipality, it means the road administration, it means the maritime administration and class societies, and together we can realize the projects, but there needs to be efficiency in the next steps. So our key message is really that now, actually, if you look at the hydrogen-based fuels, so methanol, hydrogen, ammonia, one of our 150 partners have achieved and have demonstrated this. Now the additional fuel solution, LOHC, different types of fuel cells, it needs to be demonstrated. But it is there, and the next is to have performance additions and performance improvements, and we need to move forward with precision and speed. And the natural thing to talk about is market mechanisms, and to talk about to getting the real volume so that we can move beyond the one ferry. So very much looking forward to be part of the panel here.
Thank you. If you could give me the microphone, and you can take a chair. So next up will be Catherine. So welcome, Catherine. So Catherine is the managing director at SSE Thermal, with responsibility for the strategy, performance, and development of the company's flexible power generation and energy storage activities via carbon capture and storage and hydrogen technologies. You have an extensive operational commercial experience from your previous roles at the international mining firm Barrick Gold, where you were both the Chief Operating Officers for North America and Chief Financial Officer. Prior to this, you worked as a Managing Director and Fund Manager at BlackRock, one of the largest fund management companies that we have. And today, you will give us a perspective on the UK view on Hydrogen Valley. So welcome.
Thank you. So yes, I'm slightly the odd one out in that I'm not sure I classify as Nordic, but there's a long history there which we won't go into. So SSE is a power utility in the UK and Ireland, and now beyond. We've got portfolio in Southern Europe. Effectively, we're positioning ourselves to be a leading energy provider in a net zero world. And that's very much driven by the UK's target of decarbonising the power system by 2035. So as a provider of renewable power, of networks, and of thermal power, effectively our whole strategy now is how to get the UK and other jurisdictions to net zero as fast as possible. So we have committed to spending £40 billion, so $50 billion US dollars, across renewables, be it offshore wind, onshore wind, solar, batteries, hydro, pumped hydro. We're looking at networks, so we run the networks in Scotland, as well as distribution networks in Scotland in the south. So being able to invest in those networks in order to be able to take that renewables onto the system. And then we run gross 7.5 gigawatts of thermal power. So flexible power generation. And so by sitting across that whole electricity system, what we're realizing is for a net zero electricity system that's renewables led, you need to deal with the inconvenient truth of backup capacity. And what do you do when the sun's not shining, when it's cold and it's not windy? And in fact, that's exactly what the last 2 weeks has been like in the UK. We've been at -2, there's been no wind, and guess what? Our fleet has been running baseload. But it's only running baseload for 2 weeks, and then you can be off for weeks. So you've got this fascinating situation that has led us to hydrogen. It's led us to CCS. It's saying, okay, so how do you decarbonize that hard-to-abate part of the electricity system? So specific to this, where I come in is to say, well, actually, as a builder of renewable wind, and particularly large-scale offshore wind, so we're building the biggest offshore wind farm with our partners Equinor, and a part of ENI at Dogger Bank. And we want to build more, so we've got other projects in the pipeline. What we're seeing is that offshore wind is constrained by grid. And so our pace of building renewable wind is limited by can you get a grid connection. So hydrogen for us is a route to market. And so it was seen as a great way of being able to accelerate renewable wind development and produce a product that you can then sell either locally or internationally. The flip side, as a thermal power generator, is that I need a low-carbon fuel to be able to deliver thermal power generation at scale. Now, I can either do that through power CCS, which was what the last conversation was very interesting about, or I can do it via hydrogen. And the perfect thing there is that we're effectively the whole hydrogen value chain. So we have renewable power delivering potentially electrons to produce green hydrogen. We have gas storage facilities in salt caverns in Yorkshire that can convert and be developed into the storage solution for hydrogen. And we are the off-taker in potentially the hydrogen power stations. And so by that, in the Humber, which is where I'm getting to the point, we have now come up with partners Equinor and ourselves, looking at, okay, how can we deliver that value chain within a single ecosystem on the east coast of the UK, which is already an energy estuary. It's already the largest industrial emitter in the UK. And can hydrogen be the solution? And can SSE, along with Equinor, have that role across the value chain? So that's where we come in terms of the topics today. So thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Rikke Olufsen. Please come to the stage. I'm not sure which mic you'll get. Yeah. So, Rikke is the Deputy Director General of the Danish Maritime Authority, a position you have had since 2017. The Danish Maritime Authority is a governmental agency under the Ministry of Industry, Businesses and Financial Affairs in Denmark. You hold a master's degree in political science from Aarhus University, and you are an experienced governmental official, not least in the maritime field, where you have experience from 2008. In your position, you, among other tasks, had the Danish delegation to the climate negotiations at IMO, and you're also a member of the Executive Committee for Mission Innovation's Zero Emission Shipping Emission, an international public-private partnership working to facilitate the green transition to green shipping sector through innovation. So we're looking forward to hear more about what you have to bring to this conversation as well. Welcome.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for inviting me on this very interesting panel, where I feel like the odd one out. Sort of our angle to this is that we, as the Danish Maritime Authority, see ourselves as an important part of the maritime community, and not least the maritime value chain. And as shipping is one of the hard-to-abate sectors, and also important off-taker of alternative fuels, preferably hydrogen-based, we see that we play an important role in making this possible. And we do this from very different angles. First of all, of course, we see it as our most important task to send the signals from the negotiations in the IMO, sending a clear signal to industry that they should invest and that we expect them to decarbonize. Secondly, we try to promote this through private-public partnerships. As you mentioned, the zero-emission shipping mission, where we're trying to demonstrate how to do this in a feasible way and try to clear some of the barriers through our projects. But also with the Nordic cooperation we have under the Nordic Council of Ministers, where we work with our Norwegian and Swedish colleagues in terms of green corridors, as you didn't mention, and I think that is one step to the solution, because then it's sort of limited scale. You can see how it's working, and you can draw some experience, and you can learn from it, and do it in a bigger scale afterwards. And lastly, we play, of course, a very important role in making sure that the ships that are sailing out there on the hydrogen-based fuels are actually safe for both the seafarers and for the ships themselves, but also in the ports. And in that sense, we are also working ahead of the regulation, and that makes it even more important that we are trying to be innovative and also have an eye for security in this. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you bring the microphone with you, we'll have a quick panel debate. So I have a question first. So hydrogen valleys are a concept that is being discussed all over the world. And the Nordic countries in particular, but also the UK, is globally relatively far to the north. Are there any special characteristics of a hydrogen value chain in our countries that makes them different than they would be in other countries? Are there any specific characteristics that would be relevant for the North European hydrogen value chains?
I can answer that question insofar as I think what makes the Nordic countries and the UK unique is the North Sea, actually, in the scheme of things. Because either the gas economies that have been created, at least in the UK, and therefore the industrial clusters that have resulted, are directly linked to the continental shelf and the fact that there was gas. And now that's translating into the logic of hydrogen and offshore wind. And so what you've got is, you've got a source of plentiful energy, I suppose, and it's being located on coastal regions that are able to get it to the user very quickly. So it's having the source of hydrogen close to the off-taker. And in the unique situation in the UK, which I don't know is as relevant in other Nordic countries, it's then the salt caverns that come with that. So you have your value chain in a cluster that allows you to build a hydrogen ecosystem relatively quickly.
Ada, would you say that that's true for the Norwegian side as well?
I
was nodding while my colleague here was speaking. I think it's a key, this North Sea point there. So what we are seeing with the projects that go beyond the ferry sector is that and the most forward-leaning and the most promising are the ones that are for offshore windmills, for instance, and for the energy sector. And I think that that is where both the know-how and also the need in order to realize the offtake that we all are looking for is. So I think that's a very big key. And I think a lot of the time we talk about green corridors. And I forgot in my intro to say that a ferry corridor, that's the micro green corridor from 3 kilometers, right? The next micro green corridor, which is within, for instance, national waters, is, for instance, the North Sea. And then the third one is the one that we normally talk about for green corridors. So I completely agree with what was said here.
Would you like to add on, Rikke?
I think my good colleagues covered it all.
Good. So another question for you, Ada. So you're working mostly with the maritime industry, and so is Rikke as well. Would you say that the barriers for adopting hydrogen as a maritime fuel are mostly on the vessel side or on the port side of the value chain?
Right now, it's on the port side. And when I say on the port side, I mean on the land side of things. It is proven in terms of technology that it is possible, but we need the market-based mechanisms in order for investment decisions to be made. And that goes from, obviously, the production of green fuel, but also on the port side with the infrastructure.
And Rikke, as a governmental organization, how can the Danish Maritime Authority assist the development and help organizations like Maritime CleanTech develop these technologies?
Can I answer on the first one as well? Because I think that in terms of investments, I was in a panel earlier today where there was presented an analysis on the availability of alternative fuels in alignment with the IMO goal for the 2030, and it showed that actually if all the projects out there planned are being realized, we are well above the 5%. So and actually the hurdle is not necessarily within the fuel production, but it's actually the capacity of the yards in terms of building the ships. So I think it's more complicated than just producing the fuels. I think that, I mean, if we actually get the offshore wind going and all the other renewables, I think we're good to go on the fuel production side. So it's more on actually having, for my part, the ships ready to actually bunker the fuels. Yeah.
Interesting.
I think that that is a very interesting perspective, and I would love to talk more to you about that after. Obviously, yard capacity in a system where you want to change many things rapidly is key. So we are also working on a lot of projects, both on kind of retrofits and new buildings, but for the transition that we are trying to achieve, yard availability will be very interesting indeed. So I support that perspective as well. So many things to be fixed at the same time. Difficult priorities will be made. And key message is that technology is there. I guess capacity on actually getting the technology out there is one, and number two is then to have the investment decisions so that the yards will be full is a second one. And to add to that complex picture, there will also be a little bit of a challenge with competence in terms of actually working with these new ships and new energy systems on board of these ships.
Would you like to add something? Yeah?
And I think that's where we play an active role in finding the good solution to make it safe, to sell these new ships with completely different fuels, with different risks, and also making the ports ready to handle them. All these ports are situated in populated areas, which poses new threats that has to be accommodated as well. So I think there's a lot of things there where we as administrations also play an important role in making it, of course, safe, but also that approvals go through in a somewhat hastened pace. So it's not the administrations sitting on their hands holding back investments.
So thank you. Going back to the UK and you, Catherine, would you say that the discussion on hydrogen in the UK seems different than the discussion in the Nordics?
I think there are similarities. I think perhaps we're still earlier stage, or the way we've approached it is different. So I think hydrogen as being a necessary part of a net zero system is the same conversation. I think the role it plays is unclear. And it's primarily because government policy is focused on production rather than users and off-takers. And they're only now, or the transport and storage system. So it's only now that we're beginning to start to piece it together and actually piece the mechanisms and business models that are going to be required in order to create that ecosystem. So that's, there's an announcement coming next week, I believe. It's all very hush-hush, so you never know. But given I'm part of some of the supply chain and skills workshop, I've got an inside track. The announcement's coming to start the first projects. And with that, I think you then begin to see a supply chain that's motivated. You begin to see a transport and storage network that is going to get planned. And with that, you can begin to see where your offtake should be located. And together, I think that gets us to the right place. But it feels to me, and maybe it's just looking from the outside in, and this is why COP's so useful, it feels to me like the UK has done a lot of thinking, but not a lot of doing. And other countries are doing more doing, which means they accelerate their thinking. And so I would like us to do a bit more doing, I think.
Interesting. From you, Ada and Rikke, do you have any examples from the UK or the Europe or other places in the world where the Nordics could learn within the space of hydrogen valleys? Are there things that other countries are doing that the Nordic countries should adopt?
Well, not specifically on hydrogen valleys, but in general, I think for us it's really important when we are ahead of sort of regulation and what is known, it's really important to share the experiences and learn from our colleagues in all our both our Nordic countries, but also with our colleagues in other countries that are ahead of us. For instance, we look to Singapore, Japan, where they have ammonia ships, and I think we need to learn from them as well. And we also have a good dialogue with our Norwegian colleagues on these, because this is the only way where we can find a common way. Because I mean, with a ship, it's not useful if it's only approved in one end with the flag state, but if the port states are not interested in receiving the ship, I mean, we are nowhere. So it goes without saying we need dialogue and knowledge sharing.
And Ada?
I think it was very well covered here, but really big thinking, large-scale implementation also needs very bold and precise, but also forward-leaning politicians and policies. I am very positive of what I have seen so far now in, for instance, in our maritime domain in IMO, in the EU. I do think that we also need national policies and the Nordic coordination on top of that. So if there's anything that I want to see bigger and bolder. Obviously, you want very high precision, but we also need to have the feedback loop of learning and to move forward. And so we need to deploy sometimes before we have 100% of the answers. So that's my 2 cents on that question.
Thank you.
Can I just
Yeah.
The one thing I think that there needs to be more collaboration on is the standardization and particularly definitions and taxonomy around hydrogen. So the UK's agnostic when it comes to blue or green, as long as it's low carbon. And what is the definition of low carbon and how do you standardize that? In order to scale up hydrogen fast, I think we need to make sure that we're in line with Europe and eventually in line globally, in order that you don't create barriers as to what is defined as low carbon or green or blue or whatever, but low carbon hydrogen, in order then you can sell it and you can market it and you can create liquidity. And I think that is happening, but it's not happening fast enough.
So thank you to the panel. Please give them an applause. So Daniel, would you please come back to the floor? I think you can take a microphone here. So, bigger and bolder were the messages from Ada.
Yeah, I made lots of notes, and it's quite messy. So let's see if I can figure it out. First, I would like to add a few words on the obstacles I see, starting with EU regulation. Not all of you panelists were concerned, but then again, we have conflicting EU regulations that become very obvious when we talk about hydrogen. When we are producing hydrogen from solar and wind through electrolysis, we waste about half of the energy, since we need twice as much electricity as we get out as hydrogen. Now, I claim this is not a problem at all, since there will be, on windy days and sunny days, electricity in excess. So that's not an issue. We already see that. But we do have the Energy Efficiency Directive in the European Union claiming that we have to reduce electricity consumption in absolute numbers. So this doesn't compute. We can't have a situation where we want to use much more electricity when it's abundant to avoid carbon emissions, and also have directives saying we can't do that. Another way of looking at this is kerosene for flights. It's much more energy efficient to just boil or burn the fossil kerosene in the flight engines than to produce electro-kerosene through captured carbon and hydrogen. So the Energy Efficiency Directive is basically forcing us to keep using kerosene. So something has to change. That's one of them. It's very interesting that you raised the matter of getting a permit to connect to the grid, because that's what we see in Sweden as well. When you start planning for big wind farms offshore, you cannot really be so sure that you can connect those to the grids, and that's becoming much more obvious to the people planning these farms. So basically it seems that the coming 10 years, all of these will be used to produce hydrogen. That's going to be what they're used for. They will obviously be connected to the grid, but the electricity will only be delivered to the grid occasionally when the grid can take it and when it's needed. So the first, all of this electricity production that we're adding through wind farms in the Baltic and the North Sea around the Swedish coast will produce hydrogen. That we need. We need a lot of hydrogen for the iron making and for fertilizers and electrofuels. Not to forget methanol as feedstock for industry, because we also always talk about the fossil fuels. We also have to remember that we have to replace all the fossil feedstock in terms of fossil gas and oil that industry uses to produce our products. So those were a few obstacles that we can manage, but we have to start dealing with. I think that it will be a while before we start producing electricity from hydrogen, and that has to do with physics again. Since it's so energy inefficient to go from electricity to hydrogen back to electricity, it's going to be, hydrogen is going to be valuable. And there are going to be many uses for hydrogen, which has a high that high added value of using the hydrogen. So burning it is probably the last thing we want to do, and we will only do it when electricity prices are very high, which we might want to avoid in the first place through planning our electricity system, because people don't really like it when prices go very much up and down in an unpredictable manner. I was very pleased to hear about the ferry, the Hydra ferry, the project. These kind of proof of concept projects are obviously very important to show that we can change things and we can have shipping. Now this is a short distance, 3 kilometers you said. But then again, if you can run it for, what was it, 2 weeks before refueling? Yeah. So it can go much, much further than 3 kilometers, which is good news, because long-haul shipping is an issue, and even medium-haul shipping. Short ferries, maybe electricity in batteries would be an option, but for the long-haul shipping, we don't have many alternatives. Good news, though, that came earlier this week was that Bill Gates, together with Ørsted, is investing in a methanol fabrication plant producing non-fossil methanol in Örnsköldsvik in Sweden for ships. Yeah, very good news. I was so glad to hear that it's finally happening. That kind of relates both to the Nordics, to hydrogen, and to shipping. So I thought that was a very good example to raise. Yeah. Finally, I think the Nordic collaboration here has very big potential, and that is because we are culturally alike, and we enjoy, especially we Swedes, enjoy hanging out with the rest of you. But then again, it's also because of the physics of the pipelines. To become a bit technical, you know, electricity lines are not that efficient. They take up a lot of space, and they don't really transfer that much energy. But pipelines filled with hydrogen, they can transfer enormous amounts of energy without really being noticed. So chances of moving around big chunks of energy are very good with hydrogen pipelines. And you see that already in the northern parts of Sweden and Finland, that we have well-established plans to build pipeline networks for hydrogen to connect the Swedish and Finnish industry and the producers of hydrogen. So maybe the summary will end with that Nordic collaboration quote. So thank you so much. It was very interesting to listen to.
Thank you as well, Daniel. So thank you to the speakers, Daniel, Dolf, Ada, Catherine, and Rikke. Could you please come to the stage, and you'll each get a small gift from us at Nordic Energy Research. But also thank you to the listeners in the room and online. In just a few minutes, we will have a Nordic Energy reception, and that means at some point we will need to empty the room so that the invited people can get in. But if you want to wait around, you might be lucky and secure a leftover spot. So thank you, and see you tomorrow here at the Nordic Pavilion.